Hey guys, how you doing today? Here with my little dog. How you doing, Milo? You doing okay today? You having a good day today, Milo? He's got a little thing on his nose. He's looking at a truck. He thinks we're going on an adventure. Come on, buddy. Let's go. Let's go. Good boy. Sometimes he gets convinced that, oh, there's a car here. Let's get in the car. We love cars. He loves the transit. He loves getting into TTC. All of that kind of stuff. One time a bus pulled up and he just like hopped on the bus because it was just like, hey, a bus. So you gotta be careful with this guy. He wants to go on big adventures. Get out into the wild of nature. Test his mettle against the forces around him. He's a sweetheart that way. Oh, having a day off. Beautiful day today. It's February 11th or 12th today. I don't exactly know. You know, when you have a day off, you're just like, forget about it. I'm just gonna forget everything I know. Gonna eat some food, you know, sit down for a minute, do some of the chores I've got to do in my life, do your dishes, wash your clothes, you know, sort of the standard stuff. But you know, I'm blessed to have that. I'm blessed to have that time to be able to do that kind of thing. I'm blessed to have the time I have, you know, to myself to pursue what I have to pursue in order to make it through this strange plane of reality we find ourselves in. And it is a strange plane of reality, without a doubt. Sort of social agreements that we have with one another are very odd, and feel like there's a prevailing narrative that exists that says, well, these things are immutable, that they cannot be changed, they are natural, and to attempt to change them will lead to disaster. But it's completely false. One of the key attributes to being a human being and to existing as a human being is that we are infinitely mutable. That the only significant rule that seems to exist of how human behavior and human interaction should work is, as long as it's amongst the realm of consent. If everyone agrees to what's happening and agrees, then it will just remain. And that's how things will be done. This immutability argument seems to fall away through even minor scrutiny, and only seems to exist in those that kind of live in a bubble, right? If all you've ever done with your whole life is gone from worked in a small town or a small company or a company and gone between, you know, your home and that particular job, and you've never been to anywhere else, and you've never spoken to any other thing, and you've never looked at how other cultures or communities operate, then yeah, of course you can say like, well, this is the best we can do, because you've never actually looked at how anything else works. Come on, buddy. I got my little guy, he stands at the entrance. He's like, maybe if I stand here, we'll just go home. Jonathan, let's just go home and I can lie down. He loves adventure, but these walks, he's like, I don't know. There's something beautiful about this, walking through. I walk through a graveyard. I walk through this graveyard almost daily. And I'm blessed that this is right beside me. I take a look at the healthcare conversation that's existing throughout the United States is exactly what I'm talking about here. That there's this concept that there's this immutability that, oh, well, this is how the system works, and obviously it must be the best. And how do we know it's the best? Because this is America, dang it, and what we do is always the best because we're the best. And it's simply not true. And all you have to do is look outside of the borders of that country for a very short period of time. You don't even need to do serious research at this point to discover that every other developed nation, forget about most, every other developed nation is doing single payer or universal healthcare, some kind of healthcare system that takes the financial burden of healthcare off of the citizenry. And yet America still sort of persists with this delusional narrative that the way it's delivering its healthcare is the best. And now with the power of the internet, and because there is this coalescing movement, this coalescing energy, more and more people are beginning to see that, oh, there are incredibly negative outcomes to the way the American healthcare system operates. I mean, you watch a show like Breaking Bad. The crux of that show is that Walter White can't afford the care that he needs. His health care costs will destroy his family. And so he begins to pursue meth in a desperate attempt. He uses the knowledge that he has as a chemistry teacher in order to create something that, in order to fill a demand, let's say economically, and it's been pointed out several times that story, if Walter White existed in Canada, that story would be, you have cancer, we're going to take care of you, you're not going to be a burden to your family. And he would have done what he needed to do in order to recover, if that was a possible option, which, if you've seen the show, spoilers, it is. And so this concept of immutability on the social level is it's just a fabrication. It's completely false. It doesn't have any basis or bearing in anything that's observable. But of course, the conservatives are typically the one that hold on to these sort of orthodox traditional views, don't really base what they're saying on evidence. Hence the climate change denial movement that exists throughout North America. If we were basing our conversation on evidence, we would have already worked to eliminate this climate change threat from the conversation, as we've done in the past. That's one thing that I think doesn't get enough play, and it has been reported by several individuals. I think I became most familiar with it because of the work that Samantha Bee of Daily Show fame did on it. But there have been environmental disasters and environmental concerns. Maybe the best thing to say is environmental threats before. Remember throughout the late 80s and early 90s, there was a hole appearing in the ozone layer that was being caused by aerosol cans. Well, we fixed that. We resolved that problem. We acknowledged it existed. We said, oh my goodness, that is a problem for everybody. There isn't a single individual who won't be affected by that as a problem. And so we fixed it. We did what we had to do to fix it. And now we're faced with this incredible looming threat, and we're told by the people who are causing the problem that, oh, it's immutable, it's a natural thing, we can't possibly do what even if this is a problem. And then, of course, the absolute most barbaric response is, well, this won't be a problem for us, this will be a problem for the future generations. I can't imagine a more barbarous perspective than kicking the can down to make your children deal with it. It's the phrase I've been using a lot is the Great Generation is called the Greatest Generation because they faced the existential threat of Nazism head on and sacrificed a lot to do it. They sacrificed a lot to do it so that they could build a better life and a better community for their kids, who are now telling us that they will sacrifice nothing and change nothing in order to face a threat that may loom larger than the fascism of World War II. Because at least the fascism of World War II was limited to the scope of man. Now we're talking about environmental disaster on a scale that's completely unprecedented in human history, at least. Oh, hold on, got a little dog. Hi there. Hi there. Hi there. How you doing? My little guy. Yeah, Milo's a real suspicious guy when it comes to dogs. You're a good boy, Milo. You're a good boy, too. You're a good boy. Okay, buddy, come on. Here's a good boy, Milo. I know. Okay, you're a good boy. You're a good boy. That's enough. Hey, how you doing? Yeah, dogs.
Yeah. Go.
Have a good one, bud. Oh yeah, meeting in the dogs. Meeting in the graveyard. You did really good, buddy. Here, give you a little love. He needs a little love after that. You know, he's a little guy. And he's got a squinchy little face. And so when dogs come up to him, they don't really know what to make of him. And they really get their face in his face. And he gets really like, what's happening? At least he didn't bark his head off. That's a positive. Well, what's banging around? What's banging around? That was a nice little interlude. Enter the dog. That's a fine interlude to what we're talking about, which is immutability. How we could just agree to change it. We can agree to just change it. And it seems as though there's this, if there is a talent or a skill that exists for political purposes, it is persuasion. It's the ability to persuade others to change their perspective and change how they are. Because there are many things that we do fairly regularly that we could simply change, and it wouldn't have the catastrophic implications that are levied against it. Because I recently watched the movie Parasite, and Parasite is an interesting movie because the filmmakers obviously went to great lengths to show the beneficiaries of the capitalist system not as evil or villainous in any way. In many ways, they're quite loving, that they care for each other and for their own family and for their concerns. And they're very humanly portrayed, because the system of capitalism, the people within it can operate as kindly as they want. But it's the system, it's the structure of how the system operates that is deeply flawed, which is what the individualists refuse to acknowledge. They want to believe that, well, you can be a good person on a person-to-person basis, and that sort of builds this larger thing. But if you don't actually take a moment to have a meta commentary, let's say, about humanity, if you don't actually think about humanity as a larger system that organizes itself through a thing we call politics, and then accept that when the system needs to change, that it should, i.e. when the people come up and begin to throw off the old modes of thinking, if you don't think that that is something to be embraced, then you're going to fight against it. And that's throughout human history. And it's telling to me, like the arguments that are being used these days against the climate change movement especially, are not dissimilar to the arguments that were used against the anti-slave movements again during the Civil War. There's a fascinating book called Cotton is King, and it's a collection of essays brought together, written by the pro-slavery activists on the lead up to the Civil War. And the pro-slavery, the defenders of slavery, believed very deeply that slavery was a natural condition, that it was immutable, that there will always be slaves. And we can see that that is not true, that you can change your society. And unfortunately, that required an armed civil war to resolve. Will the next shift in consciousness, the next step away from slavery, also require an armed conflict? I should hope not. Because we haven't recovered from slavery. The systems of slavery shift and they change, and they want to keep their fingers wrapped around the throats of the populace. So when the populace says, no, an individual cannot be owned by another individual, that there are certain activities that one individual cannot inflict upon another individual, well, the advocates of slavery step back and they say, oh, very well, we will not own you directly. Instead, we'll rent you and we'll pay you a wage. And your time will simply buy segments of your time. Rather than you being a piece of property that we purchase and own, we will own the business and you will rent yourself to that business. And that's how the system of slavery has been maintained here in North America. It moved and shifted from chattel slavery into wage slavery. And that shift has not been accepted. People don't want to believe that they are in a slave system. The language changes from owner and master and slave to employee and employer. And even an extra layer of confusion is added to the conversation when you put in investors, shareholders. These people, these investors, these shareholders, they do nothing, they provide no service, and yet they are able to make massive decisions that have enormous implications for hundreds of thousands of people. They're able to destroy, break apart companies, lay people off, throw people into the streets, sell businesses, to sell the company to some other investor or some other group. And in many ways it resembles more closely feudalism. That feudalism, the serfs lived on the land and the land could transfer ownership, but the serfs remained on the land, bound to the land. And so we have this kind of neo-feudal system that seems to be popping up, where you are, instead of your livelihood and your living space being on the same piece of land, they've broken up the ownership of that. And so you have, and we still call them landlords. This is a funny holdover, right? As the propaganda has shifted and as the narrative structure of capitalism has shifted, and as they shift their language so that we're not slavers, we're employers. As that language has shifted, certain language hasn't. Landlord is one of them. If you own property and you rent it out for people to sleep in and have their free time in, you are a landlord, just as you were in the 10th or 12th century. There's not a difference there. And your place of employment, where you go to in order to earn the wage, this system becomes more apparent once you realize that the same people who own the land that you live in and sleep in, they also have their fingers in the places that you work. And all of this is distributed and dealt with in quote-unquote the market. But you just need to play one game of Monopoly to understand how that market system eventually denigrates and degenerates into monopolization and single control. I mean, we can see it today. For God's sakes, Disney is making like 80% of the money in entertainment right now. They have a monopoly. It's obvious that that's what that is. And they have there's no sense of them stopping that. And that's what the system generates. The system generates unequal distribution. The system generates unequal share. The system generates these incredible disparities. And because we don't have legitimate conversations about the legitimacy of this, because there are people saying that it's immutable, it can't change. It's natural that some people have to live in basements and in holes, and some people are going to live in palaces, that's the natural way of things. I feel like that's a very dangerous and closed way of looking at the world. I think it's very dangerous to stand up and say, oh well, we saw this in nature, so it must, if we see it in nature, it must reflect something that's happening in human life. But you can find all kinds of insane things in nature. Like we talk a lot about hierarchies and look at, oh well, look at these lobsters, for example. It's like, well, why not look at something else, like bees? Bees who make decisions democratically in the hive structure. Why don't we take a look? Why is it that these conservatives will praise hierarchy, but if you say something like, well, then you must support polyamory, because a male lion has many women, and that's how the structure of their society works. Oh, well, no, hold on. We all know that it's one man, one woman. Even though nature has examples of that. There's examples of monogamy in nature, but there's definitely examples of other types of relationships that exist in nature. And what it boils down to is, what is our society and what are the people within the society willing to accept? Or what do they want to accept? And how are they going to consent to what is going on in the world? And there are lots of movements throughout history that have changed the perceptions of how things should be. I think the free love movement in the 60s there's this sort of opinion that the free love movement through the 60s was this, oh, it was just a bunch of teenagers having sex with one another, which it was. But you have to consider that before the free love movement, it was still in vogue for parents to choose their children's mates. That you could still be betrothed, for goodness sakes. And this movement came along and essentially said, we're going to do away with that. If someone stood up here in North America and said to their child, oh, you're going to marry this person over here, we would think that would be very odd. That's a kind of a medieval sort of a thing. And we don't really accept that. So it turned out that was not immutable. It was malleable. It was shiftable. And I think that there are lots of things that we can come to a consensus about that are malleable, that are shiftable. And we have to be open to them. Because if we pretend as though what we are currently experiencing is the natural order of things, that that we have stagnated, that we exist as the final form of humanity, well, then when the forces of nature rise up and say, what your quote-unquote immutable, unchanging perspective is doing is destroying you, which is exactly what the earth is saying to us, then you will be wiped away and you will be washed away. And I mean, you don't need to look too far. Just look at Australia to see the method by which humanity will be cleansed from the earth. Well, on that chipper note, I'm home. Walked the dog, successfully done. I suspect this video gets 0 views because it's weird. It's not about Bernie or something specific like that. But I'm doing it mainly for myself. To get thoughts out that I don't really have anywhere else to express. Ooh, big long video. Didn't think it was gonna be that long. All right. I love you all. I hope you're having a good time out there. Have fun.